All right, hi there. We are on our quiz review for sections 1.3 through 1.5. So what I need from you is to make sure you have out your notes for this part of the video. We're going to do our learning target 1.3. So please make sure you have out the notes for learning target 1.3. That's function composition. Okay, so remember, just going back through, just a refresher, we're talking about when we are doing function notation, we call this one on the outside the letter, that's our outer function, and this f stands for f of x. And then our inner function is the one closest to the x, or if there's a number in there, and that's our inner function again. So when we talk about that, in function composition, we make sure to take the inner one and do that first. Or if there is no number, we do the inner one and we put it into the outer one. So we're going to be using this particular note sheet for the first part of our review. Okay, so looking at number 1, we are given two functions. It says f of x right here is 2 times the square root of x plus 3. And then I'll circle that. That's our first one. And then we have our second function, which is g of x. And that is negative 3 times x plus 1. So it's all of that. So we're going to be doing the function composition. So remember, we are going to do the inner function first. When there is a number, this is where we talked about two different ways. We can either end up combining the functions first, f and g, and simplifying and then putting the 1 in. Or we can do we put the 1 into the g and we get a number. And then whatever that number is, we put that new number into our f, and then that's our final answer. So I'm going to do it the second way I talked about, just because it's just a little bit different than the bottom part where we do put them together. So I want to show you both ways. So for our top part for these, we're going to, with the numbers, we're going to do taking this inner function and using the number 1. So this becomes negative 3 times 1, because that becomes our x, plus 1. Okay, so then we're going to use our calculator and we're just going to solve this. Okay, so negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus 1 would give me a negative 2. So I'm just going to put a squiggly under that. That's not our final answer, but that's the new number we have to work with. So now we are then going to take the next, or the outer function, and we're going to use this number that we came up with. Okay, so now I have to use my outer, which is f. So we have 2 times the square root of negative 2 plus 3. See where that x is? I plugged in what number I got. So then again, I actually will have my final answer. So we write it as, we can rewrite it, or up here, just put the equal sign. So f of g of 1 equals, and then whatever our final answer is here, we would just put that up here. That's how we write it in function notation. Okay, yep. For this last one, you should have had, when you put it in your calculator, it equals 2. So then I just rewrote on the other side, f of g of 1 equals 2. Or you can just have 2, it's fine. All right, let's look at problem number 2. So this one is the opposite. It wants you to take the 1 and put it into f first, come up with a number. And then it wants you to take that number and put it into the g and come up with your final answer. Yep. So, yep, your final answer is negative 11. And then going on to number 3. So it's written for us, when we look at our note page, it can be written this way as well, but it tells us this f times g. It can also mean that f is the outer, the one on the outside is the outer, and the one closer to the X is the inner. So then we would do the inner again first, and then we do the outer last. Okay, so this is written just a little bit different, but the same thing. We're going to do the G first and get an answer. So yes, when we plugged that 0 into our G, we ended up with -3 times 0 instead of our X plus 1, and we ended up with 1. So now with that 1, we're going to take it and plug it into our F and see what we get. And when we plugged that in, our final answer would have been 4. All right, going on, I want you to try number 4 on your own and see what you get. I want you to do both things. Plug the 6 into the F, get a new number, and then plug the new number into the G and tell me what the final answer would be. So your final answer is -17. So when you plugged in that 6 first to the F, you just happened to come up with another 6, and then you plug that in again, and that's how we got it. All right, let's look at 5. It should not be much different. Just because we have a fraction here, it doesn't mean it's any different. So we know how to plug the fractions into our calculator. I want you to go ahead and do the first thing and plug this 4/3 into our function g of x and see what you get. So yes, we have a -3. We just plugged it into our function. Now you're going to take that and finally you're just going to plug that in and tell me what our final answer would be. So our final answer, yes, is 0. When we plugged that in, it ended up as 0. The square root of 0 is 0. 2 times 0. Okay, so now I want you to try the very last one. It's a big number, but we're still going to be able to do it. So I want you to give that one a try and tell me what the final answer would be. So yes, looking through all of our work, plugging it into the first one, we came up with that 20. And then we plugged that into our G, which was our second one, or our outer, and we got a -59. Okay, all right, so we are going to go on to looking at the ones where there is no number, but we have to, it's kind of like 1.2. We're plugging in one function into another. So we just have to remember we're taking the inner one and plugging it into the outer one. So we need to use parentheses. All right, so for this one, I'll just use for F, I'll use green, and then I'll use purple for H, although I alternated colors the other time. I just like to color code things so you can see they're two separate pieces of work. All right, so let's look at this first one and just read it. It says g of x. So this is our inner that we start looking at first, because we have to take this one and plug it into F. And then also just going back, I've circled g of x with pink. Okay, so again, so we are going to write out our outer one and plug in wherever we see that x, we're going to plug in whatever the inner one is. So I'm going to start with 4 times, and I'm going to use the parenthesis for times. I'll put the little dot there if it helps. And then x. Well, we know that we're plugging in the g of x because that's what it tells us in here. So I have to plug this thing in here, that whole x over x plus 3. Okay, and then I continue with plus 3. So that's how I plugged this in. I took the inner one and I plugged it in after writing the outer one. Okay, so I want you to look at this one and go to our example when we have the fraction ones, or for example, example 3 on our notes. When we have that, we need to change the number out front, remember, to also be a fraction, and then we can multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom, and then simplify from there. Okay, so that's just another example. When we have the fraction bar, if there's a whole number out front like there was here, We just made it a fraction so that we could simplify. Okay, so looking at this one, although it kind of looked scary at first, now we can see, oh, we have to make it like 4/1. So then it becomes, let me move this up here. This becomes 4 times x. I'm just going to rewrite my work over here, which is 4x. And then it becomes 1 times this whole thing. Well, it just stays the same. And then that, because it stays the same, so plus 3, or yeah, x plus 3 on the bottom. And then again, out to the side, that's not part of the parentheses. We just do plus 3. And from there, we're done. There's nothing else we can do to simplify. Okay, so this can be a trickier one, but again, I'm going to just put example 3 notes, just so if you need to look back and see a fraction one, that's what we do. Okay, so looking at number 8, that one's a little bit easier because it's not gonna be as confusing when we set it up. So we're starting with looking at, so our inner right here, this is the one we're gonna plug into the outside one, or our outer. So we have to start out by writing this g of x. Anywhere we see an x, we have to put in our f of x function. So all of this 4x plus 3, every time we see an x, we write all of that, okay? So it starts with x. Well, we know x is 4x plus 3, and then all over x plus 3. So then it becomes x, which I'm going to put it in my parentheses, 4x plus 3, and then again, plus 3. So right away, we just, what we'll end up doing is simplify across the top and then simplify across the bottom. That's our first step. So I want you to try that real quick. Yep, so this one at the top, we're looking at it. There's no combining like terms, so I'm going to keep it here, 4x plus 3. But if I look at this, there's no timesing, but I can take this 4x, and this actually becomes 3 plus 3, so we get plus 6. So then from here, we can see right away, these will cancel each other out. 3 over 6 can actually just simplify to 1/2. This is one where we actually come up with a totally simplified answer. That's not going to always be the case. It's just sometimes the case. So again, for these bottom ones, revert back to example 3. On our note sheet, we have tons of different ones. Okay, so now we're going to look at number 9. I'm going to have you try to set up number 9 for me on your own. Just set it up. Okay, so if you set this up correctly, you plugged your h, you plugged this entire x squared minus 2 into where you saw the x for the f function. So our f function is 4 times x. So this was our h of x. And then plus 3, we just continued with it. Okay, so from here, what I want you to do is distributive property, combine like terms, and tell me your final answer. Okay, so your final answer after you distribute is 4x squared minus 5. All right, so now we're going into the next part of our note sheet. It's on the back of your 1.3 notes. So we're looking at example 4 now, where we have a table, which is a little bit easier. Again, where we have a table, so and we are going to do the composite functions. So remember this one here, we took, for the first one, again, we looked at the inner one first. You always do the inner one first. So we looked at where g of x is 2. So we looked at the g table where x is 2, and we found that it was the g of x is 3. So then we had to take that new number and we had to go to our f function table. So we're going to go there. It's a table this time. And we're plugging in the new number where f of x, or the x itself, is this new number. And we looked across to see what the f of x would be, and we got our final answer. Okay, so that's a little bit easier than plugging in functions into each other, because you just get to look at numbers and then find new numbers. So let's go to number 10. And the first thing I just want you to do, remember, I want you to circle this g of negative 10. This means that in your g table, you are going to look where x is negative 10. And I just want you to start there, because I like to do g equals. I just want you to start there where g is g and our x is negative 10 in that table. Tell me what that new value would be. So, yep, it's 0. So g of x, I'm looking here, the x is negative 10, so it's 0. That's our new number we're working with. So now we go to our outer function, and we are going to take this f, and we have to find now where f of x is 0. So we go to our f table, and then I want you to find where the x is 0, what is the f of x? So yeah, again, we're on the x's. So I look here, and so that bottom one, so this would tell us our final answer is 1. I'll put a box around the final answer. There's our 1, okay? All right, so I want you to try 11 on your own, doing the same thing. So this means the same thing. Remember, function notation, whether it's in this form or this form, we start with the inner. So you're looking at the f of x table first. We're pretending this is our x first, and then we look across. We find our new number, and then go to the g table and find your new number. So I want you to do that one on your own and see what you get. So for 11, you should have had your final answer is 15. Okay? I put in my app, and I looked up here. I have my arrows in. That's how I found the negative 8 first. And then I took the negative 8, and I went to the g table, and I used that negative 8 as my x to find my final answer. Okay? So I want you to try 12 on your own. Okay, for number 12, you should have got 31 as your final answer. Looking back at this, you plugged in your g. We pretended x was negative 10, and we got 0. So then we used that new number, and we plugged it into our outer, which happens to also be g, but we have a new number. So we have to go where x is 0 this time, and then find the new answer. Okay? All right, go ahead. Give 13 a try, even though it's written a little bit differently. We know it means the exact same thing as 11 in terms of how you do things. All right, so 5 should have been your final answer. Okay, go ahead and give 14 a try. That's another one where you're going to plug it in, you'll get a totally different answer. So give that one a try and see what you get. Okay, you should have got 1 as your final for this one. So now I just want you to take a second, couple minutes maybe even, and finish 15, 16, and 17 on your own, since these are all very similar and we've done practice. Go ahead and do those, and then you'll check your answers against mine. Okay, so looking at that one here, they got a negative 2 as our final answer. Checking my work, I put my first step and then my second step. 12 is 31 as our final answer, and then 17, we should have had 16 as our final answer. Okay, we are going to switch gears one last time and look at the graphing part of this. So this would be example 5 on your note sheet. I just put it up here, example 5, back of our 1.3 note sheet. Again, remember here when we have graphs, I use different colors, but we kind of do the same thing, except we're drawing lines in and we're seeing where the graph hits. So for this first one, we take our inner at g when x is negative 1. So we went to the x-axis for this first one, and I used purple for it. And I went to where x is negative 1, and I drew a line here. And I looked at where g of x, that's the straight line one, I looked at where that line hit. So if I look here, right away I could tell it was across from the 0, and that's how I came up with my first number as being 0 for this one. And then what we did is we went to, and we just called it, now it's f of 0, or we're just looking to, again, where with that new number, we're making that our x, so we go to the x-axis, and I used pink for this one, and I drew a vertical line and 0. 0 is like, it's the origin, but it's right here. And then I have to say where f, that would be this one here, where that graph hits 0, where does it hit? On the y-axis, okay? So we know it's at 0, and then it hits here at 3 when I do the y-axis here. So it hits at 0, 3. So that's why this here, that's our x, that would technically be our y, okay? So that's how we did the graphing part. There's some other examples too. So we're going to do the ones on our review, but you're going to use this to help you, okay? All right, so let's look at the bottom here. I have 18 and 19. I'm going to try to zoom in, but when you have yours, you can see it a lot better too. So it's asking us, it's just telling us why we're just pretending they're just regular functions here. These are, we'll get into that later, the next section, but next couple sections, the parent functions. But for right now, they're just basic. So they labeled them. They already put the functions on the graph. So all we have to do is we have to pretend for this one, it's just h of 3, and I'm just rewriting it this way. So we're going to pretend that x-axis, remember, that's the vertical line. That was from the last couple sections too. We go to the x-axis, we know is across, and we draw a vertical line at 3. That's our inner function. So I'm drawing that here. And I'm going to see where does h of 3, so we're looking at the h one, which is this one over here, right? So it's going to be this line here. It hits at 3, and then we know that's on the x, so then we look at where on the y. So if I put my other dot, it's across from the 2. That's where it hits across from the 2 on the y. So now we're going to use this 2, and we're going to find g of 2. So again, it's the same kind of thing. We pretend that x is 2, and we draw a vertical line at 2. But now we have to be careful. Make sure we're using the correct function. This one says to use g. So I'm going to look at the g line, which is this one down here. And I'm going to see if it hits at the x-axis at 2, where does this line hit? Right here, if you followed it across to the y. And I put the little dotted. So it looks like it hits at -2. So our final answer is -2. So I want you to go ahead and I want you to try 19 on your own the same way. You're first going to do the h of -8. Find out real quick, where does -8 hit on h? And tell me that answer. Just do that little part first. So it hits at -3. If you draw your line in and you're doing the h function, you look at -8, follow it down, it hits right here, and then I drew my little dotted lines to see where it hits the y. So now you're going to take that 3 and you have to plug it into and find g of -3, because now we're in g and we're using this number. So go ahead and draw that vertical line and tell me where it hits the g, which is our final answer. So drawing my line in, I knew I just was doing a vertical line and it has to do with the function g, so I just drew it straight up. You can draw it all the way down. But I knew I was just looking at this graph, and I knew when you zoom in a little bit, you can see better. It does hit at 5 across onto the y-axis. So when I draw my x is -3, it hits right here on this graph. So my final answer would have been 5 for that. So flip your review over, and I want you to try the next problem, number 20, on your own. Even though it looks a little bit different, it's the same idea. All right, so this first one, you would have drawn your vertical line at 1, and you're going to look for the h function. So I just drew it straight up, followed it across, and it hit at 3. So then I use that 3 for my outer function. And I went to 3 and I drew a vertical line. I know I have to hit this function here. That's my g of x. So I'm going to just go down. I could draw it all the way, but I just went down. And I saw it hit right here. So then I followed that over to my y-axis, and that hit at -9. And now I want you to try 21 on your own, and we'll be done. All right, so for the f of 5, when you drew your vertical line, you would have noticed it hit right here. And you follow that over, it hit at 3. So then we used h of 3, that's our outer one. And then we found at 3, it actually hits right away. Here's our h. It hits right here on the x-axis, and we know that on the axis that's actually 0. If you follow it across, you're at 0. So that's our final answer.